James was known for his curiosity. At 24, he had a good job, close friends, and a pretty normal life. But one thing always stood out: his love for the unusual and unknown. One evening, after a night out with friends, James found himself alone in his dim apartment, scrolling aimlessly on his laptop. Thoughts of the dark web drifted into his mind. He'd heard rumors about it, a place where you could buy strange things, see forbidden sights, or get a taste of the underground. He never thought much about it until now. With a mischievous grin and a rush of adrenaline, he muttered to himself, "Why not? Just this once." He had no idea this choice would lead him into a nightmare he could never escape. James wasn't a hacker and didn't know the dark web well. After a few searches, he stumbled upon a strange marketplace. Unlike ordinary online stores, this one sold disturbing items hidden behind encrypted links. The listings showed mysterious products, bottles labeled Essence of Fear, cursed relics, and even haunted dolls. But one category in particular intrigued him: mystery boxes. These weren't innocent surprises you might buy at a store. The listings were eerie, warning buyers with phrases like "enter if you dare" and "not for the faint of heart." Each box was a mystery, an invitation into the unknown. The thrill of it was overpowering, and he found himself clicking through until he saw one that seemed to call to him, a simple box labeled "The Gift." It was plain, without a description or warning, but something about it felt sinister. With trembling fingers and a pounding heart, he clicked buy, setting into motion a chain of events he could never undo. Days passed, and James nearly forgot about his late-night purchase. But then, one morning, as he was leaving his apartment, he found a small, plain cardboard box on his doorstep. There was no return address or label, only his name, scrawled in shaky, smudged ink. His curiosity turned to unease as he lifted the box, immediately noticing a faint metallic smell that clung to it. The odor was hard to place, a mix of rust, decay, and something far worse. He hesitated, but couldn't resist the urge to take it inside. In the dim light of his apartment, he examined it carefully, feeling the cold sweat of anticipation and dread as he pried it open. Inside the box were items more disturbing than he could have imagined. The first was a worn black and white photograph of a young girl. Her face was scratched out, leaving only a haunting figure with blank, empty eyes staring back at him. Next, there was an old doll coated in dust with a cracked porcelain face and painted eyes that seemed disturbingly lifelike. But the last item was what made him recoil. It was a small, clear glass jar filled with murky, yellowed liquid, and floating inside it was a single, realistic eyeball. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to look closer. The eye was unsettlingly human, and it seemed to stare up at him as if alive. His hands shook as he replaced the lid on the jar, heart pounding with a mix of horror and curiosity. James's mind raced, but he couldn't bear to throw the items away just yet. He told himself it was probably a prank, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. That night, as he lay in bed trying to push the disturbing box out of his mind, he heard a faint tapping. He tried to ignore it, brushing it off as a random sound, but it grew louder, persistent, almost rhythmic. Finally, he gathered his courage and looked. Outside his third-floor window, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Sitting on the window ledge, as if waiting for him, was the doll from the box. Its cracked face stared at him, its eyes hollow and lifeless, but somehow locked onto his own. Panicked, James threw the box and its unsettling contents into the trash the next morning, relieved to be rid of it. But as he returned home that night, he felt a sense of dread as he approached his door. There, on his doorstep, was the box. It looked exactly as it had when he first found it, its sinister contents waiting inside. Each day after, he tried to get rid of it. He tossed it, burned it, buried it. Yet every night, the box was back, sitting on his doorstep as if waiting for him. Shadows seemed to gather around his apartment, and he felt watched, even haunted. James tried telling friends, but they thought he was losing his mind. Shadows seemed to move on their own. Strange whispers filled his nights, and each day he'd find the cursed box back in its place. But the final straw came one night when he awoke to see the doll from the box sitting at the foot of his bed. Its hollow eyes glowed in the darkness, and as he tried to scream, his voice caught, trapped by something he couldn't see. He felt paralyzed, unable to move or speak, as the doll seemed to inch closer, bringing with it a chill that seeped into his bones. Some mysteries are meant to remain unknown, and some doors should never be opened. For James, curiosity turned into a curse he could never escape. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of the dark web, the gift waits for its next buyer. Lisa was a young, hard-working woman who often found herself staying up into the early hours of the morning. Her job demanded late nights, and to fill those solitary hours, she'd explore the internet, often dipping into strange corners of the web, and occasionally the dark web. It was just for fun, a curiosity she indulged in when the world was asleep. Chat rooms with anonymous users sharing secrets, forbidden stories. Lisa enjoyed the thrill, never believing that anything could actually be dangerous. But one night, she found a chat room that would change everything. That night, while she scrolled through endless messages, a notification popped up. Lisa had received a private message from a user with a cryptic username, someone she hadn't seen in the chat before. The message read simply, "Hi Lisa, working late again, I see." Her blood ran cold. Her name wasn't visible on her profile, nor had she shared any personal information in the chat room. Trying to calm herself, she replied, "Do I know you?" But the user didn't respond. She waited, each second stretching into minutes, but nothing. She tried to brush it off, laughing nervously, thinking it must have been some strange coincidence, but deep down a fear had already taken hold. An hour passed, and her focus began to drift from the unsettling message. Then, her screen pinged again. Another message, this time a photograph. Curious yet hesitant, Lisa clicked on it, and her heart skipped a beat. It was an image of her taken through her apartment window, her silhouette caught in the dim light as she sat at her desk. She spun around, scanning the darkness outside her window, but she saw nothing. Locking the windows, she tried to brush it off to convince herself it was all a trick. But as she sat back down, she felt a cold sense of dread settle over her. This wasn't a prank. She was being watched. Minutes passed like hours as Lisa sat, glued to her phone and computer, praying that the messages would stop. But the notifications kept coming, each one a new photo. First, it was a shot through her window, then one from her kitchen, then her hallway, and finally her bedroom. These weren't just random shots, they were taken at close range, each one from different angles inside her apartment. Lisa's stomach dropped as the horror settled in. Whoever was doing this wasn't just lurking outside. They had been inside her apartment, moving around her as she went about her evening, capturing every vulnerable moment. She wanted to scream, but she felt paralyzed, her fear too great to even move. Each time she tried to call for help, her phone would vibrate with another message. The words felt like they were being whispered directly into her ear. "It won't matter. I'll always be here." She couldn't take it any longer. Grabbing her keys, she ran out of her apartment, driving aimlessly, desperate for some relief from the relentless stalking. She ended up at a friend's place, hoping for some peace. But even there, her phone buzzed, and the familiar feeling of dread returned. She looked down to see a photo of her, taken right there at her friend's door, as if to mock her escape attempt. There was no one she could trust anymore. Days passed, but the terror followed her wherever she went. She changed her number, switched apartments, and tried to go off the grid. But every time she thought she was safe, a new message would come through from an unknown number. Each photo grew more terrifying, capturing her at her most vulnerable moments. Lisa's paranoia grew, and she found herself questioning everyone around her. Friends, coworkers, even strangers on the street. She could no longer trust anyone. Everyone was a suspect, and every shadow a potential threat. Then one night, the final message arrived. Her phone buzzed and her heart raced as she reluctantly glanced at the screen. It was a photo of her, standing in her new apartment taken just seconds ago. A message accompanied it, the words blurring together in her mind as she read them. "There's nowhere you can hide." She screamed, calling the police, but by the time they arrived, her stalker had vanished, leaving no trace. Lisa changed her number again, moved yet another time, but the photos continued. She realized with grim finality that this nightmare was far from over. The dark web had opened a door to a terror that would follow her forever. Lisa's life became a constant state of fear. Every face in a crowd, every unfamiliar sound, every dark corner felt like a threat. Her stalker had stolen her peace, turning her world into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Sometimes, curiosity can lead to places we were never meant to see, places that keep a piece of us forever. Paul was a quiet, ordinary guy, known among friends for his fascination with technology and mystery. Late one night, after reading horror stories online, he stumbled on mentions of something called the Red Room, a rumored live streaming event on the dark web where viewers could witness unspeakable horrors. Most people wrote it off as urban legend, but Paul's curiosity got the best of him. Ignoring the warnings, he decided to explore, convinced he'd find nothing more than an elaborate hoax, but he was about to be proven terribly wrong. For hours, Paul scoured forums and clicked through cryptic links, moving deeper and deeper into the dark web. Finally, he stumbled upon a site claiming to host a live Red Room event. The webpage was like nothing he'd seen, filled with strange symbols, barely readable text, and a glowing blood-red color that seemed to pulse. At the bottom of the page, a single message beckoned him in: "Enter if you dare." Paul's hand hovered over the mouse. With a deep breath and a hint of excitement, he clicked. The screen flickered, and a broadcast began. The image that appeared was haunting. A dimly lit room, decaying and decrepit, with walls peeling and shadows creeping into every corner. In the middle of the room sat a single empty chair, shrouded in darkness, as if it held a secret. Silence filled the air, thick and unnerving. Paul's heart began to pound, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking into a place he was never meant to see. Suddenly, a figure entered the frame, a person cloaked in a dark hood, their face obscured. They stood motionless, facing the camera. The figure's presence filled Paul with an inexplicable dread, as if they were studying every person watching from the other side of the screen. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last, until the figure leaned forward, as if peering directly into Paul's own room. Slowly, they began to read names, each spoken word echoing through Paul's speakers like a threat. Paul sat paralyzed, the figure's low, distorted voice sending chills down his spine as each name was read out slowly, almost menacingly. He held his breath, hoping he wouldn't hear his own. But then, the figure paused, and after a tense silence, they leaned even closer to the camera. The sound crackled as they whispered, "I see you, Paul." His blood ran cold. Somehow, this person on the other side of the screen knew who he was. Panic surged through him as he fumbled to close the stream, but his computer was frozen, the hooded figure's face still filling the screen. Desperate, Paul yanked the power cord from his computer, hoping to end the nightmare. But even after the screen went dark, he could still hear the whisper, faint and chilling, as if the figure's voice had seeped into his room. He sat frozen, unable to move, the whisper lingering like an echo. And that was just the beginning. From that night on, strange things began happening in Paul's apartment. Paul began hearing faint whispers, voices he couldn't place, following him no matter where he went. Objects in his apartment would move, shadows seemed to lengthen and twist. His once cozy home now felt like a prison of dread, and every time he tried to dismiss it, a new reminder of his dark web experience would surface. He could hardly sleep, each night waking in a sweat to the faint echo of the hooded figure's voice. Then came the final horror. One night, he woke to find his computer on, casting a blood-red glow across the room. He knew he had unplugged it, Yet the screen was active, displaying a chilling message. "We are here." Trembling, he moved closer, only to see the hooded figure's face flash briefly across the screen, eyes glinting with dark intent. In that moment, he knew he would never truly escape. The Red Room had followed him home. Curiosity can lead us into places we're better off avoiding, and sometimes the things we encounter leave marks we can't erase. Paul's life became a silent scream, a haunting reminder that some corners of the internet hold shadows darker than we can ever imagine. And once those shadows have seen you, they never let go.